So this is the Dell XPS 15, the 9570. It's a thin and light 15-inch laptop with pretty good performance and a killer screen. It's got super thin bezels, it's got 100% Adobe RGB, like this thing is awesome. It's one of the main features that drew my attention, and it's also a well-respected laptop, and after having used it for a while, here are my thoughts. The laptop is made out of aluminum with a soft touch carbon fiber material for the keyboard deck and palm rest area. I didn't love it at first, but I quickly got used to it and I like it a lot more now. I think it's a great texture. The hinge tension is pretty good, although it's a bit on the stiffer side, so it's not exactly a one-hand open. And there's also 5 LEDs on the side of the laptop that tells you your battery life. The rubber feet on the bottom raises the laptop for airflow and they are very grippy. This thing does not slip around. This keyboard is actually one of the better keyboards that I've used so far. Not quite as nice as Apple's chiclet style keyboards, but I really like it. It's got a great layout, good key travel, it's got white LED backlighting, but I'm not a big fan of the light bleed from around the keycaps. You also have a fingerprint sensor / power button on the top right. It's quick, but it won't register if you only have half of your finger on there, which isn't something that I see with the MacBook Pro. Now, coming from a MacBook Pro, this trackpad just isn't going to be as good, but it's a pretty solid trackpad. It's got a frosted glass surface, great texture, accurate tracking, and my only real complaint is the clicking mechanism, but that's just because I've been using force touch trackpads for a while now. I think it's a great trackpad. I don't think I'll need to bring a mouse with me on the go, but you're not going to love this if you're coming from a MacBook. The screen on this thing is definitely the biggest selling point, and it is awesome. So there's a 1080p model with 100% sRGB, which looks pretty dull and muted to me, but the one I have here is the 4K option. It's got amazing colors, it's got 100% Adobe RGB, great contrast, brightness is good but not as bright as the MacBook Pros, and you also get super thin bezels. My only criticism is that it doesn't seem to be able to get that dim, but it doesn't really bother me. Now, I haven't used like a ton of laptops before, but this is definitely one of the best laptop screens on the market right now for content creation. One of the more interesting things that I've noticed is there aren't any speaker grills on the sides of the keyboard. The speaker actually fires from the bottom of the laptop and they don't sound that great. It doesn't get very loud, there's almost no bass, so it sounds quite flat. I mean, it's usable, but the Surface laptop and MacBook Pros have much better speakers. Port selection is pretty good. On the left we have a USB-A port, full-size HDMI, a USB-C port with support for 4-lane Thunderbolt 3, and a headphone jack. And on the right we have a second USB-A port and a full-size SD card slot. It would have been nice to have a third USB-A port, but overall it's a solid mix, and the Thunderbolt 3 port now supports 4 lanes of PCIe for full 40 gigabits per second. The webcam is positioned on the very bottom of the screen so it looks up your nose. I personally don't use a webcam, so I don't mind this, but if you need one, well, it's not a pretty angle. Performance on the XPS 15 is pretty good. It's using an i7-8750H, it's got 16 gigs of RAM, a 512 gig SSD, and a GTX 1050 Ti Max-Q. The GPU is definitely the biggest weakness, but other than that, it's a pretty solid machine. The i7 performs really well in both games and video editing. The RAM is user upgradable and you can install up to 32 gigs. The stock 512 gig SSD is very fast, getting reads of 3100 and writes of 1100 megabytes per second. And the 1050 Ti is pretty basic. It's better than the integrated graphics and it's pretty good, but you're not going to be crushing games at 1080p at ultra graphics. Thermals are good for games and short renders, but if you put a heavy load on both the CPU and the GPU for an extended period of time, this thing will throttle down to keep it from overheating. For CPU only tasks, it won't throttle, even in Prime 95, but once you add in the GPU, it's just not good enough. Fan noise while gaming is relatively quiet, it doesn't really get that loud, but if you push it to its max with a CPU and GPU stress test, it does get pretty loud. I found that the fans rarely actually spin at full speed, and I couldn't find a way to manually set the fans to full speed, so until Dell lets us do that, the thermals on this thing aren't great. One thing that kind of bugged me is when I was installing the Windows updates, the bottom left of the keyboard area got very warm, and it's kind of where my palm rests when I'm typing, so I'm not a big fan of that. The battery in here is a 97 watt-hour battery, and I'm getting like 6.5 hours of battery life with the screen at 70% brightness. Light to moderate use with Discord open and maybe some YouTube videos. I am using the 4K screen, so if you go for the 1080p model, you'll get better battery life, but the colors on the 4K screen are so much better that the trade-off is worth it for me. There is a USB-C port on the left that supports charging, but you're going to need to use the barrel plug to get the full 130 watts. And the charger they include is pretty compact, so I just bring with me just in case I need it. So the Dell XPS 15. The body is made out of aluminum and carbon fiber, and it's built really well. The screen is awesome with super thin bezels. The keyboard is comfortable to type on, and the trackpad is good with accurate tracking. The speakers fire downward and they sound pretty bad for a 15-inch laptop. Battery life is good, but I'd probably bring the charger with me just in case, and all of this for 2,100 Canadian dollars. If you're looking for the best performance in a thin and light chassis, I'd probably take a look at the Asus Zephyrus. I'll probably have a review on that soon, but yeah, I think this is a great laptop. It's a bit on the expensive side, but if you got the budget for it, this checks a lot of boxes to being a great laptop. So that's the end of this review. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, please hit that subscribe button. I'll see you guys next time.